Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Berkley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs and the BMW Center for German and European Studies, I'd like to welcome you to this very special event, the Mohammed cartoon controversy 1 year later. When Professor Thomas Banshoff, director of the Berkley Center, and I first discussed this event back in early September, I think we were both motivated by a desire to try at least to open up a fresh perspective on this important issue. In short, to conduct not only a retrospective dialogue about the significance of the affair, what happened and what we've learned, but also to cast our eyes forward and talk about the future and the possibility of finding our way out of this controversy to common ground and mutual respect and understanding. Clearly, as we continue to experience the reverberation of Pope Benedict XVI's remarks in Regensburg earlier this fall, these issues live on. Let me introduce our two special guest speakers before turning the microphone over to Professor Banshoff, who will moderate the proceedings. First, to my immediate left, Mr. Aiman Mazyek was born in 1969 in Aachen in the Federal Republic of Germany. He completed his graduate program in philosophy, economics, and political science at Aachen University, and also simultaneously a program in Arab studies in Cairo. Since 1994, Mr. Mazyek has been a member of the plenary assembly of the Zentralrat der Muslime in Deutschland, the Central Council of Muslims in Germany, and he served as chief editor of the council's internet site, www.islam.de, since 1996. From 2001 to 2004, he was the council's press spokesperson, and early in 2006, he was elected general secretary of the organization. Mr. Mazyek is also an active member of the Free Democratic Party, the FDP, serving as chair of the local party in Alsdorf, Kreis Aachen, among other duties that he carries out for the political party. He works as a freelance publicist and media advisor. To my far left, no political persuasions implied, Flemming Rose was born in 1958. He studied Russian language and literature at the University of Copenhagen. From 1990 to 99, he worked as a correspondent for the newspaper Berlingske Tidende. My Danish is terrible. Tidende. It's non-existent, actually. First in Moscow, and then in Washington, D.C. In 1999, he became Moscow correspondent for the newspaper Jyllands-Posten, and in April 2004, he took on the position of cultural editor of the paper. And as many of you know, it was his decision as cultural editor to publish the cartoons that launched the Jyllands-Posten Mohammed cartoons controversy late last year. We have a lot to talk about, so I'm going to keep it very brief. I'd like to turn it over to Tom for the proceedings.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you all for coming during this last week of classes here in the fall semester. I think the fact that we have the turnout that we do speaks to the importance of the Mohammed cartoon controversy, the way that it still resonates 1 year after it began, and I think it will resonate into the future. It's not too early, though, to take a look back, and this is the premise, I think, of the event today, and think a little bit about the significance of the event, to perhaps rehearse or revisit some of the familiar arguments that we all know about freedom of the press on the one hand and respect for religious sensitivities on the other. I think that will be something that comes up in the conversation. But also to ask some questions about how we got to where we are, how this whole thing got started, how the publication of cartoons in a Danish newspaper became a political event, and then, as we know, that political event spun into some violence as well earlier this year, which has since, of course, subsided, but the controversy lives on. Many of the themes, again, relevant in the context of the Pope's remarks on Islam. So this is really an occasion to talk to two people who are very involved in Europe, on the ground, if you will, in the controversy. You can shed some light on it, help us here in the United States understand the European dynamics of the controversy, and perhaps relate it back to the broader theme of Muslims in Europe, in Germany today. So that's my broad agenda. What I'd like to do is divide our time together into 3 parts. I've asked Flemming and Aiman to each give about 15 minutes of remarks, touching on some of the themes I just described. Flemming will get us started, and when they're done, the three of us will have a conversation where I'll ask some follow-up questions. I may get a chance to try my hand at some translation from German into English, so bear with me. It's not my first profession. And then we want to make sure to leave time for a broader discussion, so at least the last 30 minutes from 4:30 to 5 will be dedicated to a question and answer session with the audience, which Jeff will moderate. So again, thank you very much for coming, and with that, you have the floor.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for inviting me. It's a great honor for me to be here at Jyllands-Posten University. I will make 3 or 4 points in my remarks, and I will try to establish the context for the publication of these cartoons, because it's my experience when I talk about this that very few people, in fact, know about the whole context, and it gives way to all kinds of misunderstandings. But let me start by saying that this is a unique case in the sense, and I'm saying this because a lot of people afterwards criticized me for not being aware of the kind of reaction that the publication might cause. But this is, in fact, the first time ever in recorded history that Muslims have insisted on applying Islamic law to what non-Muslims are doing in non-Muslim countries. This is not my own, thoughts. This was something I was told by Bernard Lewis, the professor of Islamic Studies at Princeton University. And Salman Rushdie doesn't count here because Salman Rushdie is an apostate. He used to be a Muslim, but he fled the Muslim faith. So this is not a similar case in that sense. This is just to give you a sense of uniqueness and why it is hypocritical when people are insisting that why couldn't you foresee the kind of reaction that in fact took place around the world. Then a little bit about the background for the publication. It goes back to the middle of September last year. In Denmark, a children's writer who was writing a book about the life of the Prophet went on the record in the Danish media complaining that he had troubles finding an illustrator for his book about the life of the Prophet. As you know, in the US, as well as in Denmark, when you write a book for children, you need illustrations. And when you write a book about the life of Jesus Christ, you need illustrations of the way Jesus Christ looks. And when you write a book about the life of the Prophet, children would like to have some images of how the Prophet is looking. But as I told you, the children's writer couldn't find an illustrator, and he, according to him, 3 people turned down his offer, referring to fear for the consequences, specifically referring to the fate of Theo van Gogh, the Dutch filmmaker who was killed on the streets of Amsterdam, November 1st, 2004, and also referring to an incident that took place at the University of Copenhagen when a non-Muslim teacher read out from the Quran in the classroom, and after that he was attacked on the streets of Copenhagen, being accused of reading out as a non-Muslim from the Quran, which, according to those Muslims who attacked him, was a way of showing disrespect for their faith. The illustrator who finally took up the job insisted on anonymity. And anonymity, in my book, is a form of self-censorship. You do not want to appear under your own name. And this has later been confirmed by the illustrator. He gave 2 interviews to Danish newspapers in which he confirmed that he insisted on anonymity because he was afraid what might happen to him if he published those illustrations under his own name. That was the reason why I, in the beginning, commissioned the cartoons. I wrote a letter to 42 members of the Danish Cartoonist Society in Denmark, referring to this case with a children's writer and asking them to make a drawing of the prophet as they see him. This is very important. As they see him. This was a very neutral way of putting it. I did not ask for mocking, for ridiculing, for making fun of. I was just asking the illustrators and cartoonists to make a drawing of the prophet as you see him. But because we do have a tradition of satire when dealing with religion in Denmark, we make fun of Jesus Christ, we make fun of Hindus and Buddhists, Jehovah's Witnesses, what have you. We make fun of the royal family. We make fun of public politicians and all kinds of things. So some of the cartoons turned out to be satirical, which was perfectly within the limits of the way we do these things in Denmark. The cartoon did not in any way transgress the norms of normal behavior in Danish society. It turned out that 12 out of 25 responded, out of 25 active members, so that was about half. But then we had an internal discussion at the paper, so we were in fact holding the story for about 10 days. We were discussing if this was enough journalistic evidence to go with a story like this. But then, within the course of 2 weeks, several things happened that convinced me that here was a legitimate story that we had to publish. First, at Tate Gallery in London. Tate Gallery is the big museum in London. The authorities there removed a piece of art by the avant-gardist British artist John Latham, an installation called God is Great, which is showing the Bible, the Talmud, and the Quran torn into pieces and layered in a piece of glass. The museum removed this piece of art without asking the artist. He was furious and insisted on having all his art removed from that museum afterwards. They didn't ask the police if they saw any threat in exhibiting this piece of art, and they didn't ask any religious group, including the Muslims in the UK, if they felt offended by the exhibition of this piece of art. So that was another sense of another example of self-censorship when dealing with Islam. Then Aiman Mazyek, the Somalia-born Dutch politician, published a book in several Western European languages, and some of the translators of that book, as you may know, Aiman Mazyek wrote the scenario for the film Submission, that was a direct cause for the killing of the director, Theo van Gogh. She is now with the AEI here in Washington, D.C. One of her books was translated into several Western European languages, and some of the translators of that book also insisted on anonymity, referring to fear for the consequences. They did not want to appear on the same cover as Aiman Mazyek. So that was a third example of self-censorship. Then a Danish stand-up comedian gave an interview to my newspaper in which he explicitly said, I'm apologizing for the obscenity, but this is a direct quote. He said, I have no problems with pissing on the Bible, but I do not dare do the same thing with the Quran. So that was a fourth example. Then at a museum in Gothenburg in Sweden, a painting by an Iranian Muslim female artist called A Scene of Love, depicting two human beings having sex, and with a verse from the Quran on top of the painting, was removed by the authorities, also without asking the artist and without asking the police if they saw any threat in exhibiting this piece of art. And then finally in Copenhagen there was a meeting between the Danish Prime Minister and a group of Danish imams, a group of imams in Denmark. And in that meeting one of the imams called on the Danish Prime Minister to make his influence on the Danish press in order to get a more positive coverage of Islam in the media, which to my mind was a call for censorship. He was asking the head of the Danish government to use the tools of state power in order to interfere with an independent press. So in the course of 2 weeks we had 5-6 cases all speaking to the same problem of self-censorship and the problem of some members of a religious group making demands for special treatment of their religion in the public domain. And that is why we decided to go with this story. We could have covered it in a usual way by writing a Sunday feature about the problem of self-censorship when dealing with Islam. We decided to go with it in an unusual, I would say creative way, according to the classic journalistic principle, don't tell it, show it. Then my third point, but this was the context of the publication. I'm happy to answer further questions if they might appear. Third point is about the situation of, with integration and immigration in Europe, and specifically with the Muslim minority. Is this a clash of cultures, or is it possible to have some kind of peaceful coexistence? Peaceful coexistence sounds very nice and beautiful, but in fact this is a term that was coined by Nikita Khrushchev, Secretary General of the Soviet Communist Party in the beginning of the 1960s, when he was talking of peaceful coexistence with the capitalist world. In fact, meaning, as long as we are weaker than you are, we are in favor of peaceful coexistence, but as soon as we are strong enough, we are going to crush you. I think, in fact, that a clash of cultures is a clash of values. It is very important that we engage and take on this clash of cultures or clash of values in order to make integration working, and in order to safeguard the fundamental liberties of our democracy, which I think is being challenged not by Muslims as such, but by Islamists, adherents to a new totalitarian ideology. And I don't think that this is a conflict between them and us. I don't think this is a conflict between Muslims and non-Muslims. I think this is a conflict between those who subscribe to the liberal values in the Western European secular democracies, and those who are in favor of establishing Sharia law and promoting or trying to enforce the values of Islam on the large society. I just give you two figures to illustrate my point that I in fact think there is a clash of cultures and why it is important to engage society in this kind of debate. After the publication of the cartoons in May or June this year, for the first time ever, the 200,000 Muslims in Denmark were being polled. And one question in that poll sounded like the following. Do you think free speech always should have preference compared to consideration for people's religious feelings. And only 9% of the Muslims in Denmark said yes. When you ask the Danish population the same question, more than 50% would answer in the affirmative. If you turn the question around and you ask, do you think religious feelings always should have preference compared to free speech? Only 8.5% of Denmark as a whole would answer in the affirmative, while more than 50% of the Muslims would say yes. So this is a clear clash of values concerning fundamental issues in a liberal democracy. Yes, I think I have been speaking about. Yeah. Okay, so I think I'll. Well, let me just make one more point. Why do I think it is important to engage in this debate about fundamental values, and why it is important to say no to this asking for special treatment, whether it be prayer rooms in high schools, the prohibition on images of the Prophet, separate swimming pools, different treatment of the sexes, and so on and so forth. Why is it important to say no to this? It is important because it turns out that many moderate or secular Muslims are being intimidated by the Islamists if we allow this kind of special treatment. Just give you one example. In a high school on the outskirts of Copenhagen a couple of years ago, Muslim students were allocated a prayer room in the high school. And in the beginning, it was only the radical Muslims who joined that prayer meeting on Fridays. And there were a lot of secular and moderate Muslims who didn't want to go to the Friday prayer. They wanted to, to live a secular life and keep their religion private. But it turned out that the radicals started to approach them and ask them, why don't you come to the Friday prayer? You are bad Muslims. So this kind of special treatment gives the radicals a tool to intimidate the moderates and the secular. Point two, why it is important to say no to special treatment. If we do this, we will accelerate the process of establishing parallel communities in Western Europe. In the UK, already you have some housing projects where people are living by Sharia law, implying discrimination of women, and rules and norms that are incompatible with a secular society where equal treatment between sexes, between human beings, no matter what their color, what their age, what their sex is. That's the second reason why I think it's important to say no to this. And finally, special treatment undermines the principle of equal treatment in democracy. And if we allow this for one group, if we should be consequential, we would have to allow it to any minority or any group in our society who have some kind of taboos or rules. That would mean that the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Christians, the Jehovah's Witnesses who are against blood transfusion should be allowed to impose their taboos on large society. And I would say that religion shouldn't have a special place. So this should also imply political groups, all kind of interest groups, fruit collectors or Kurdish nationalists or what have you, and it is obvious if any society is to allow special treatment of minorities according to what kind of taboos and rules they have, we would very quickly end up with a society where freedom and democracy would be harmed in a major way. Thank you.
Thank you, Flemming.
Professor Anderson, dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm very glad and happy to speak to you today here in Georgetown University. It is my first talk here, but not my first visit. Since 10 months ago, I was here by the program of the US State Department. Ladies and gentlemen, the Mohammed cartoons of your newspaper bring well-known stereotypes into play and portray Islam as being violent, archaic and barbaric to the core, as you mentioned now. In addition, the cartoons discriminate against a certain group of people, defaming their religion, which is in fact a case of racism. We are familiar with the contemptuous portrayal of people of different faiths, from the portrayals of Jews dating from the early days of the 20th century. Today it is the Muslims' turn, contrary to that time, where the Jewish people was suggested to have to achieve the world's domination or to be greedy for money and malicious. Only the prejudices are not alike, except the reproach for world domination. Today there are the following images: readiness for violence, love of terrorism, and to be prepared to die for terrorism. The terroristic attacks, most of the victims are Muslims, and the September 11 seem to affirm this theory. This debate comes at a time when the social attitude towards immigrants in Europe and towards Muslim immigrants in particular has seriously deteriorated. Open discrimination that flatly rejects Islam as a terrorist religion is increasing. The Western governments very often look away, and very many of those states do not have the constructive policy regarding Muslims, minorities, sometimes with fatal consequences, as this case demonstrates. Admittedly, we all underestimated the vehemence of the protest in the Islamic world. We were obviously out of depth, a fact clearly demonstrated by the Danish government's unfinished attempts at crisis management. Arab countries boycotted Danish imports, ambassadors were summoned, entire social groups suddenly stopped buying Danish produce. This was a huge blow to Danish society, not in terms of culture, but in terms of economics. Jobs are at stake. Years of hard work by Danish companies in places like Saudi Arabia have gone up in smoke overnight. Danish business responded by begging Prime Minister Rasmussen to make an apology. This image is now firmly entrenched in European minds. However, instead of calming frayed nerves by pursuing a policy of de-escalation, the bell for round 2 of the fight has been rung. Commentators of both sides of the fence are fanning the flames and sense that they have at last found conclusive evidence of what they have suspected all along, a clash of cultures. The debate is being exploited, and many media representatives already wrongly believe that they are campaigning for the freedom of the press. Moreover, an ambulance reporting in Western media generated the impression that a crowd of Arab rebels groups would stand in front of European gates, burning flags and publishing the freedom of press. In fact, there were hundreds of peaceful demonstrations in the Islamic world. Not to be mentioned that, for example, neither in Europe nor in the US, any Danish flags burned. On the other hand, the Islamic world feels that this episode confirms its unwavering image of Europe as a blasphemous continent steeped in Islamophobia, and now feels obliged to set an example. The discussion about cause and effect has been overshadowed. Emotions and resentments now dominate the debate. Each party thinks it knows best and wants to impose its view of the world on the other. And this is where things really get absurd. Call the whole thing a dialogue of cultures. But the dialogue of cultures cannot be conducted in a destructive and defensive manner. On another thing, it is a matter, of course, that religion can be criticized, and that in some cases where necessary, the followers of a religion must be criticized. However, this debate is no longer about whether the prophet should have been portrayed in a cartoon or not. But does freedom of expression give people the right to blaspheme and to carve prejudices in stone? Is provocation the only way we see fit to conduct a critical dialogue with Muslims in future? The indignation about the cartoons that has gripped the Islamic world is now skillfully being reinterpreted as a symbol of the battle against press freedom. Note, indignation is another human right. Naturally, everyone should roundly reject and condemn the chants and threats of Muslim hooligans who are willing to commit acts of violence. However, these scenes are being served up on our television screens in an excessive force. This image does not accurately reflect reality. On the contrary, the societies would like nothing more than have the rule of law and press freedom in their own countries, which is not the case at present. And I'm speaking about the Arabic and Islamic countries. A quick scan of our basic law proves that press freedom and respect for religion need not be mutually exclusive and can indeed complement each other beautifully. But at present, they are being built up into incompatible opposites by those scaling the barricades on both sides of the divide. It is already clear who the winners will be, the Huntingtons of both sides. But where are the reasonable people? Where are the sober-minded? Where are those who try hard to create peaceful pictures instead of enemy pictures? where those workers of dialogue are, who only keep doing hard work every day to establish peace. In these days, they are called naive persons or even naive potentates. The Western world certainly has to think about the tension between freedom of religion on the one hand and freedom of press and freedom of art on the other hand. Muslims should also join this discussion and not avoid it. Yet, the topic satire capability of the society and the respect for the holy ones in each religion cannot be discussed only to the debit of the Muslims. This would be too much for us. You as a Jew, as a Christian, you as a Muslim, even the humanist also, and the agnostican, they all should make their contribution. Because it's here not the questions about how much Islam can the Western world endow, but it is mainly the question how to deal with own values, mostly coming from the three monotheistic religions. Yet, those who despise the human rights, cultures, religions, they all should please remain outside or join the fundamentalist groups, because they know very well the business of decadence and to politicalize faith thinkings and religion affairs. They are, by the way, the true winners of the cartoons controversy, because they love the clash, they love nihilism, they love destruction. We do not. Because the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said once, and I could surely cite saying of Moses and Jesus as well, peace be upon all of them, the believer is the one who conveys safety for mankind, and you should face the malefactors by forgiving and understanding. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aiman. I think I will not have any trouble getting a conversation going between these two. And Flemming has already said he'd like to respond to some of the points you raised.
Yeah, a couple of points. I would like to start out by trying to, redefine some basic concepts in this debate that I think has been turned on their heads. It's a concept of tolerance and of respect and of freedom of religion. I have been accused of being intolerant and of showing disrespect and of violating people's freedom of religion. But in fact, if you go back and look up the word tolerance, in a dictionary, it means that you have to tolerate people who have point of views that are different from your own. And tolerance is not directed at the one who speaks, the one who makes a drawing, the one who watches a picture. It is in fact directed and required of the one who reads a novel, who watches a cartoon, and who watches a painting. So it is not my newspaper who has been intolerant in this case. It is those who has been trying to intimidate us into silence. This is a concept of tolerance, and tolerance is key to a working democracy. I do not agree with what Abu Laban, the radical Imam of Copenhagen, is saying, but I have to tolerate him as long as he is expressing himself within the limits of the law. Respect is a different matter. I think respect requires some kind of positive recognition. And I don't think respect is that important to a democracy as a concept of tolerance. No one can ask of me to respect what Abu Laban is saying, but I have to tolerate him within the limits of a working democracy. Finally, freedom of religion. You know, the basic concept in freedom of religion is the right to say no to religion. If you doesn't have the right to say no to religion, there will be no freedom of religion. And may I remind you that before the concept of freedom of religion was written into the Danish Constitution in 1849, everyone was required to go to the church on Sundays. When the principle of freedom of religion was established, it meant that the citizens of Denmark didn't have to go to church on Sundays. They had freedom of religion. And the publication of 12 cartoons in a newspaper doesn't in any way violate the principle of freedom of religion, although even the Prime Minister of Turkey is saying so and is insisting on having written into every document of the European Union that it should be a criminal offense to criticize or insulting people's religious feelings and thereby going against the last 200 years of European history, which I think make it difficult to argue for the inclusion of Turkey into the European Union right now. Then the point of stereotypes and stereotyping and demonizing the Muslims. This is just not true. I don't know how many of you have seen that newspaper page. There is no stereotyping or demonizing of Muslims in those cartoons. They are very different, both in the way they are depicting the Prophet. In fact, only 3 out of 12 are specifically taking issue with the Prophet, and also in whom they are targeting. May I remind you that one cartoon is in fact making fun of me and my newspaper, calling me or my culture department a bunch of reactionary provocateurs. There is 2 cartoons making fun of the children's writer who couldn't find an illustrator, ridiculing him for making a PR stunt out of this affair. There is a cartoon depicting the most anti-Muslim, the most anti-immigration politician in Denmark in a lineup as if she's a criminal. I don't think this fit the picture of stereotyping and demonizing Muslims and the Islamic faith. It is true there is one controversial cartoon that I have been asked questions about for the last year. One depicting the Prophet with a bomb in his turban. And people are saying, well, thereby you are saying that every Muslim is a terrorist. I think this is a kind of illiteracy when it comes to reading cartoons. Of course, any cartoon is just representation of a part of reality. You can't paint 1.3 billion people there and then say they are not terrorists. At the same time, I think it is fair to say that some Muslims, some individuals who belong to the Muslim faith have committed terrorist acts in the name of Islam. Thereby not saying that the majority of Muslims are peaceful people, of course, but I think that cartoon is in fact representing a fair picture of a part of reality, and it is 1 out of 12, and as I told you, they are very different. Then about the Jews. I don't think the Jews were knocking on the doors of Berlin in, let's say, 1939 to get into Berlin and enjoy all the pleasures of the growing economy of Adolf Hitler. In fact, more Muslims want to get into Denmark as ever before. And I don't think that would have happened if those Muslims were feeling the sense of discrimination that you are talking about. And if you compare the images of Die Stürmer and those of our cartoons, you can see that, I mean, they are very, very different, and there is no stereotyping and demonizing of the Muslim population of Denmark.
Mr. Rose, also ich bin nicht überrascht, dass Sie mit so vielen Vorurteilen hier zu uns sprechen kommen.
Mr. Rose, I'm not surprised that you come to us with so many prejudices.
Aber ich bin doch überrascht, dass Sie kaum Selbstkritik hier zulassen.
But I am surprised at the total lack of self-criticism in your remarks.
Es geht hier um das Spannungsverhältnis auf der einen Seite, die Respektfähigkeit in der westlichen Gesellschaft gegenüber Religion.
It has to do, on the one hand, with Western society's capacity to respect religious communities,
Und die unumstrittenen und richtigen Aussagen, dass das Meinungsfreiheit, Kunstfreiheit nicht daran nicht gerüttelt werden darf.
And the belief, which is not really contested by anyone, that freedom of press and freedom of artistic expression should be respected under all circumstances.
Niemand möchte hier Zensuren einführen, niemand möchte an diesen Werten rütteln, aber wir möchten alle gemeinsam darüber diskutieren in der westlichen Gesellschaft, wie wir die Religion, wie wir religiöse Werte, wie wir das Heilige in der Religion respektieren können.
No one wants to really introduce censorship here. What we need is a discussion about how the values of religion can be respected in our public sphere.
Und vor diesem Hintergrund hat eine Zeichnung bei den Muslimen und ich denke auch bei vielen Nicht-Muslimen für große Irritationen gesorgt. Das ist die Zeichnung, wo der Stifter, der Prophet der Muslime als Terrorist dargestellt wird.
And there was, of course, one cartoon which caused tremendous irritation among Muslims, and that is the one where the Prophet was portrayed as someone who encourages terrorism.
Dies ist nicht nur sachlich falsch, sondern erfüllt den Tatbestand des Rassismus. Hier hat man eine ganze Religionsgemeinschaft, eine ganze Gemeinschaft als Terrorist dargestellt. Und das geht nicht. Und das hat mit Meinungsfreiheit, mit Kunstfreiheit und mit Satirefähigkeit nichts zu tun.
Not only is that factually wrong if you understand the Prophet and his life, it's an example of racism, it's the equation of Muslims with terrorism. What was the last part? It has nothing to do with freedom of opinion, it has to do with respecting other religious communities and creating a space for dialogue across these cultural boundaries.
Es ist nicht in Ordnung, Herr Rose, dass Sie Umfragen heranziehen, die in der Hitze der Debatte um die Kartons gemacht worden sind. Und die sind alles andere als ein Beweis, wie allgemein Muslime dieses Thema sehen.
It's not really fair for you to cite polls that were taken in the heat of the debate. They're really not indications of the overall Muslim approach to these matters.
Im Übrigen ist mir stark aufgefallen, dass Sie selbst mit unwahrscheinlich vielen Stereotypen arbeiten. Sie haben auf der einen Seite gesagt, dass diese oder jene Künstler angegriffen worden sind und dann haben Sie in einem Satz gesagt, das sind Muslime, die Sie angegriffen haben. Wie kommen Sie eigentlich dazu, das als eine muslimische Position zu verstehen?
And I have to say I'm surprised. I feel as if you're also working with the stereotypes in your own presentation and switching back and forth between using the term Muslim to refer to some Muslims and Muslims to refer to all Muslims.
Und natürlich ist es in unserer heutigen Zeit recht einfach, diese ganzen Dinge in einen Topf zu werfen und hier keine Differenzierung vorzunehmen. In Anbetracht dessen, dass die Welt im Ungleichgewicht herrscht und dass vor allen Dingen viele Ungleichgewichte in der sogenannten muslimischen Welt herrscht, ist es natürlich einfach, hier einfach anstatt zu differenzieren, zu pauschalisieren, Dinge sozusagen, die in unterschiedlichen Teilen dieser Erde stattfinden, alles auf die Muslime zu projizieren.
Of course, it's very easy during a time when the world is in a real imbalance to overgeneralize, to oversimplify, to speak of the Muslim community as if it is a one single force and not see all the differences.
Ich bringe Ihnen ein Beispiel, um nur zu zeigen, dass selbst unsere Medien gar nicht absichtlich, aber durchaus dieses transportieren, dieses Bild. Als vor über einem Jahr eine schreckliche Bombe in Sinai hochging, in Dahab, in Ägypten, und wiederum mehrheitlich Araber ums Leben kamen, zum selben Zeitpunkt hat sich eine tamilische Selbstmordattentäterin in Sri Lanka, eine hinduistische sri-lankesische Selbstmordattentäterin, in die Luft gesprengt, ein sogenannter Selbstmordattentat, und 11 Menschen in den Tod genommen. Fast keiner oder niemand hat davon berichtet.
And here, I really believe that our media shares a lot of responsibility for this imbalance. For example, last year, there was a suicide bombing in Egypt in the Sinai that got quite a bit of press attention. The suicide bombing in Sri Lanka by a Hindu fanatic received almost no media attention.
Und es sind klare Zahlen, die das belegen, dass gerade der Missbrauch von Religion und auch von Weltanschauung keine Eigenart vom Islam ist, sondern leider Gottes in anderen Religionsgemeinschaften auch stattfindet. Und der Ferne Osten ist davon noch weitaus mehr betroffen als der Nahe Osten.
And let's not forget that all religions have been and continue to be abused for evil purposes. Evil is perhaps too strong. For ill purposes. And the Near East is just one example of where that's happening. It's happening in other parts of Asia and around the world as well.
Aber ich möchte nicht aufhören mit einem selbstkritischen Ansatz.
But I'd like to end on a self-critical note.
Verstehen Sie mich nicht falsch, meine Damen und Herren. Der Islam befindet sich in dieser Welt nicht in einer Hochphase, sondern in einer tiefen Depression.
I don't want you to misunderstand me. I really feel as if Islam as a whole now finds itself not in a period of flourishing, but actually in a period of depression.
Und solche Terroranschläge und fanatischen Ausläufer sind nur die Ausläufer, sind nur die sozusagen das, was sichtbar ist. Aber das, was nicht sichtbar ist, ist diese Auseinandersetzung um die Werte, um die, wenn Sie so wollen, auch die Neuinterpretation des Islams im 21. Jahrhundert.
The terror attacks are a symptom of this malaise, if you will, but I want to underscore that there's also a lot of questioning going on within the Muslim community about where Islam should go in the 21st century.
Und so verstehen Sie auch, wenn ich sage, die Muslime sind überfordert, dieses Thema alleine anzugehen. Respektfähigkeit auf der einen Seite, die Meinungsfreiheit auf der anderen Seite. Sie sind angewiesen auf die Mithilfe ihrer Glaubensgeschwister, der Juden, der Christen, aber auch der Agnostiker und der Humanisten.
Just to finish by noting that as we in the Muslim community wrestle with this problem of respect for religious sensibilities on the one hand and respect for the principle of press freedom on the other, we cannot and we don't want to do it alone. We want to engage our co-religionists, or not co-religionists, other believers in other faith traditions, Jews, Christians, as well as agnostics in this very important debate. Okay, let's have one more brief intervention from each of our panelists, and that will still leave us a half an hour for questions from the audience. So again, please just 1 or 2 minutes, okay?
Yes. Quite a few accusations was directed at me, so I want to answer. First, the principle of respect for religion. I mean, I am a big supporter of freedom of religion, and I support freedom of religion for Muslims. And when I go to a mosque, I behave in accordance with every rule in that holy house. I take off my shoes, I will not make a cartoon of the Prophet. If I bring my daughter, she will be dressed accordingly, and so on and so forth. But if Muslims or representatives of any other religion ask me to obey their religious taboos outside the mosque, I don't think they're asking for my respect. I think they are asking for my submission. And I think that is incompatible with the principles of a secular democracy. Then the principle of racism. I just don't understand, because you don't call people who ridicule or criticize Christianity for racists. I think there is a fundamental difference between making fun or satirizing a religion and people belonging to a specific ethnic group. You can't choose the color of your skin. You can't choose the gene, flowing in your veins. But you can choose and you can leave a religion. It is not something you are, that is in your genes. It's been a long tradition in European society to criticize and to challenge religious authority, and I don't think it has anything to do with racism. And that's also why I have problems with the concept of Islamophobia. It is true there are people who, have criticisms about Islam and Muslims, but it very quickly turns into a situation where you are calling people names, Islamophobes, every time they say something critical about Islam. And then my final point. In fact, the publication of the cartoons was an act of recognition of Muslims in Denmark. In the sense that by publishing them, we were saying to the Muslim population, we are not asking more of you, we are not asking less of you, but we are asking exactly the same as we do of every citizen in our society. And thereby we said to them, you are part of this society, you are included, you are not on the margins, you are not just here for a temporary period like guests and then you go home. You are here to stay, and therefore you are to live by the same rules as everybody else.
Ich bin überrascht, dass ich scheinbar nicht verstanden worden bin. Man darf natürlich, man soll die Muslime kritisieren. Das ist gut so, das brauchen wir.
I'm surprised that it hasn't been understood. It's a good thing that Muslims should be criticized. That's something we need.
Wir brauchen auch Cartoons und wir brauchen auch Karikaturen über die Muslime und Islam. Jawohl.
Jawohl. We need cartoons. We need caricatures about Muslims, not Islam.
Ich verstehe nicht die Künstler, wir haben gerade in Deutschland ein, zwei, die mit Aufmachungen kommen und ihre Kunstsammlung eröffnen, die das mit folgenden Sätzen gemacht haben: ich würde nicht über Muslime etwas darstellen, ich würde nicht den Islam sozusagen mit einbeziehen. Ich frage, warum nicht?
I don't really understand artists in our society who are increasingly going on the record saying, I'm not going to touch Islam, I'm not going to touch on Muslim themes. My question for them is, why not?
Ich möchte lachen über die Muslime. Ich möchte lachen. Und Lachen ist gesund. Das habe ich mir sagen lassen von meinem Arzt.
I want to laugh. I want to laugh about Islam. I want to laugh about Islam. But laughing is good. That's what my doctor tells me.
Und alles, was gesund macht, das sollten wir umsetzen. Und es geht hier nicht darum, dass wir irgendeine Zensur schaffen wollen. Es geht nochmals darum, dass wir das Heilige der Religionen, mir ist klar, da gibt es keine feste Linie. Und das muss ständig auch von den unterschiedlichen Akteuren, ob das der Satiriker auf der einen Seite ist oder der Religionsvertreter auf der anderen Seite, durchaus kontrovers diskutiert wird. Aber mit dieser Kontroverse, diese Kontroverse verschließen wir uns nicht. Die wollen wir uns ja stellen. Wir wollen aber nicht, dass gesagt wird, alles was heilig ist, muss unter dem Messer der Karikaturen gestellt werden.
We acknowledge that there has to be this controversy, there has to be this difficult drawing of lines. People in the media have to make tough decisions, artists have to make tough decisions, where press freedom begins and ends, where respect for religious sensibilities begin and end. This is a healthy conversation, it's one that has to be had and we shouldn't be afraid of.
Und nochmals, dieses ist keine Diskussion, die wir nur auf den Rücken der Muslime austragen. Dies ist nicht eine Diskussion, die nur mit dem Islam etwas zu tun hat. Dann tun wir etwas, was wir Muslime selber nicht wollen, nämlich die Islamisierung der Debatte. Das ist nicht eine Frage nur des Islam, sondern es ist eine Frage, wie ich überhaupt im 21. Jahrhundert mit Religion umgehe, welchen Stellenwert Religion hat und wie die Respektfähigkeit auf der einen Seite, aber auch die Werte wie Freiheit, Meinungsfreiheit und Kunstfreiheit, wie das aufrechterhalten werden kann.
And again, in closing, this is not really, and should not be, a Muslim discussion. We have to really make sure that there's not an Islamicization of the debate. It's really a broader debate, a broader societal debate about how we engage religion in the public sphere, how much respect we show for religion in the public sphere, how we balance that respect with what everyone understands are necessary press freedoms. Well, this has gotten us off to a great start. I think it's time now to transition to some comments from the audience. I will say I've seldom been on a panel where the issues are so clearly defined and there was such a dissonance. The very language that you have both employed is so at odds. The clash of cultures metaphor that you set out there as something we shouldn't shy away from, something that must be engaged, and your vision of a conversation that needs to take place within the Islamic world and with the secular and with other religious communities. So I think we have a lot to talk about, and Jeff will take over the rest of the moderation.
As you can see, there's a microphone here in the center aisle. We appreciate that you use it. I'm sure you've all very much appreciated the forceful and respectful tone of the conversation, and I would hope we can continue that. I ask you, because there are clearly a lot of people who want to ask questions, and we only have until 5 o'clock, that you keep your questions short and that you form it in the form of a question that usually signaled by a slight inflection at the end. Please.
The debate that the caricatures of the Prophet were not, in a sense, a broader statement regarding Islam in general. But obviously, I mean, if you, for example, if you caricature the Prophet Moses, peace be upon him, as a crooked financer, that will be an implication on Judaism in general, not just Prophet or specific terrorists or whatever. Now, similar is the case with this cartoon issue. And what quizzes me the most is that while your newspaper, and you were just mentioning a while ago, that this is about, for example, the right to insult even regarding freedom of speech, you did not print cartoons which were caricating Jesus in your newspaper on the pretext that it will hurt sensibilities of some Christians. Now, why greater sensibility for one group and why not for a small minority which is disenfranchised in the country?
I'm happy to get that question to say that it is not true that we didn't print cartoons of Jesus. There was a case 3 years ago when the Sunday editor was approached by a freelancer. But we are being approached as editors by freelancers, every day. So unsolicited, he brought in some cartoons, and the Sunday editor declined to run them. But we had, in fact, printed many cartoons making fun both of Jesus and Christianity, and also of Jews. And in fact, the cartoonist who did the cartoon with a bomb in the turban was raised in a Christian fundamentalist home, and he fled and broke with his family at the age of 18. And ever since, he has been making cartoons ridiculing religion. He made a cartoon of a bomb connected to the David Star. He made a cartoon of Jesus Christ with dollars in his eyes and over his whole body, as if people were commercializing religion. So it's just not true that we didn't print cartoons making fun of other religions.
Thank you. My question is for Mr. Rose, and I assume you can probably guess where I stand. But just to preface this, yes, okay. Just to slightly preface it very, very quickly. After the cartoons came out, I tried to have them reprinted in the Hoya art newspaper, along with other cartoons from Arab newspapers represented. But my question is, and it's something that many Muslims had legitimately raised in Europe. While we talk about it's okay to print cartoons satirizing religion, we just had someone jailed in Austria for denying the Holocaust. And I'm just wondering what you feel That's an issue that's probably as sensitive to many people, myself included, as the issues are. But it seems that there's a double standard. I'm just wondering if you can comment on that.
Sure, I'd love to. I am in favor of removing all insult laws on the books in the European Union, including those who make it a criminal offense to deny the Holocaust. So I think it is very difficult, or it has made it more difficult for us to argue our case in Denmark when David Irving is spending time in an Austrian prison. But we do not in Denmark have any of these laws. And in fact, for a time, the Danish government were supporting a Nazi radio station on the outskirts of Copenhagen. They don't do this anymore, but just to give you an impression of this. And I think it is very important to cancel all these blasphemy laws, because if you look around the world, blasphemy laws is the most effective tools for dictators to silence critics. Look at the laws on the books in the Middle East and in Pakistan. It's very easy to, someone who's critical of the political regimes there, they are being imprisoned whenever they say something critical about what is going on in this country. And they are usually they are being sentenced for defaming Muslims. And it's very similar. In the Soviet Union, I used to be a correspondent there. You had laws on the books making it a criminal offense to defame the Soviet system. So I'm in favor of removing all kinds of insult laws that makes it a criminal offense to criticizing or ridiculing or denying all kinds of things.
I think Aiman wanted to...
Also die Blasphemie-Paragraphen, die wir in einigen westlichen Ländern haben, das sind eher Gummiparagraphen oder zahllose Gestelle. Ich setze da mehr auf die Verantwortung und auch auf die Initiative, die Eigenverantwortung der jeweiligen Akteure.
The blasphemy paragraphs that we have on the books in Europe really don't have much teeth. It's much more important to invest our hopes and expectations in people's own sense of responsibility.
Länder, die kaum demokratische Kulturen haben, werden immer Möglichkeiten finden, irgendwelche Gesetze zu implementieren. Und da sehe ich die Blasphemiegesetze da nicht als eine spezielle Sorte, die sozusagen dafür eingesetzt werden kann.
Countries without democratic traditions or institutions will always be in a position to implement restrictive laws, so we shouldn't think of the blasphemy laws as a sort of special case.
Ich wollte noch einen Satz zu dem Vorgänger sagen. Ich denke, in fast jeder Gesellschaft gibt es Tabus.
Just one point on the previous question. Every society has its taboos.
Und es ist nicht besonders schick, diese Tabus dann zu brechen. Von welcher Stelle auch immer. Von außen auf das Land oder von irgendeinem Künstler oder einem Akteur.
And there's nothing really chic about violating these taboos, whether from inside or from outside a particular society.
Manch ein Tabu hat so seine Gründe. Auch wir in Deutschland haben bestimmte Tabuthemen. Und die zu respektieren, gehört mitunter zum demokratischen, zum Selbstverständnis eines Bürgers.
And sometimes there are very good reasons for taboos, for example, in Germany. And that basic respect for the taboos is part of what it means to be a responsible democratic citizen.
So gehört es auch für einen Künstler und auch für einen Karikaturist als Aufgabenstellung, die unterschiedlichen Tabus der Länder zu kennen. Nicht damit er damit zum Stillschweigen kommt, nein, damit er auch weiß, wie sensibel er mit diesem oder jenem Thema umgeht. Und das finde ich eher schick.
Yeah, it's much cooler and much more chic for an artist, for an artist, you know what I mean, for an artist to really know the taboos of his or her own society and to go about approaching them with caution and a certain degree of respect.
Please.
I'm a native of Belgium, and I enjoyed the hospitality of the concentration camps in France and the Vichy. I was twice on the way to Auschwitz. that makes me a Holocaust survivor. I lost 30 people of my direct family in the Holocaust. When you talk about sensitivities, do you think that in every single country, including Egypt, where I served during the war, and Syria and others, they deny the Holocaust, which for people, the survivors, they're few now, and their offspring, is certainly one of the worst lack of sensitivities. I believe that people should respect other people's sensitivities. We have here a chief of the nation of Islam who calls the Jews, which I am, a gutter religion. I have seen copies of cartoons in Egyptian and other newspapers which pale the Sturmer of the Gringoire in France and other. And this is going on, so that it's very nice to discuss it in a friendly way here, but there is a lot of lack of sensitivity. And imagine if the few survivors of the Holocaust would start rioting just because the Holocaust is denied. I agree, you don't have to make laws for that, you just have to have people with humanity and understanding the feelings of other people. That's what I want to say.
Ich bin den Herrn dankbar für die Aussage, weil sie eben auf bestimmte Tabus eben aufmerksam macht. Und eines gehört dazu, dass man natürlich den Holocaust, der stattgefunden hat, dass man den nicht in einer Weise versucht zu relativieren. Und das gibt es. Es gibt tatsächlich auch in der arabisch-islamischen Welt Karikaturen, die das tun.
Just to translate, I'd like to thank you for that statement. There are, in fact, important taboos that we have to be sensitive to. One of them has to do with the Holocaust and Holocaust denial. The Holocaust did take place; it should not be denied. And when it is denied in the countries that you mentioned and elsewhere in the world, people are not showing one another the necessary level of respect.
Sie können versichert sein, dass mit der Abscheu, wie ich die Karikatur, wo dargestellt wird, dass der Prophet ein Terrorist ist, dieselbe Abscheu habe ich, wenn in einer arabischen Zeitung ein Jude mit einem Stereotyp versehen wird. Ich habe die gleiche Abscheu und ich setze mich genauso dagegen ein.
You can be assured that I feel the same disgust when I see such a caricature of Jews, say in an Arab newspaper, as I feel when I see the caricature of Mohammed in another newspaper. In both cases, we have a terrible problem on our hands.
Und hier wird sicherlich dann auch darauf hingewiesen, dass man natürlich in der politischen Darstellung das machen kann. Und ich sage, nein, das kann man nicht machen. Es gibt Tabus, es gibt Grenzen.
And here too, someone may really refer to just the freedom of the press, and I say no, there really have to be limits, there really have to be taboos, there are taboos.
Just one comment. I just don't accept the symmetry. You were just saying that it is very important not to decimate the experience of the Holocaust. And then in the next sentence you are making a similarity between our cartoons and what happened to the Jews in Germany. I just think it's totally out of proportion.
He said
Es
that
geht gar nicht.
You said that there were taboos vis-à-vis the Holocaust, and then we also had to respect other taboos, and then you pointed to my newspaper depicting the prophet as terrorist. As I told you, that cartoon is saying that some individuals have taken the religion of Islam hostage in order to commit terrorist acts, and I think that is a fair description of reality. And I have underlined many times that I do not think that that cartoon is saying that Islam or the Prophet is a terrorist. And it's very interesting that no one has done so much to spread especially that cartoon instead of having all cartoons in context throughout the whole world as those who criticize us the most.
aus, wenn sie den Propheten Mohammed als Stifter einer Religionsgemeinschaft, als Terroristen darstellt. Was soll ich denn darunter verstehen? Dann haben sie damit dargestellt, dass sie alle Muslime Terroristen sind. Was denn sonst? Und ich habe übrigens gesagt, haben Sie mich völlig falsch verstanden, mit der Abscheu, wie ich diese Karikatur sehe und weiterhin sehe, mit der Abscheu sehe ich auch, wenn Juden in einer arabischen Zeitung mit Stereotypen versehen werden. Das habe ich gesagt. Und was Sie daraus machen, das ist Ihre Sache. Aber das habe ich nicht gesagt.
I think we're covering some familiar ground here, but the basic thrust of it was, again, if I see that picture you're describing, that caricature of Muhammad, the founder of a religion, how can I not see that as an attack on all Muslims? And what I was trying to say before is that I feel a similar abscheu disgust when I look at caricatures of Jews in many Arab newspapers.
We have about less than 10 minutes, so what I would propose is that we just go through the row of questioners, if each of you could state your question, and then our panelists here, our guests, can cherry pick, I'm sorry to say, as to what they respond to, because we just don't have time. I want to get everybody who's very patiently waiting in line. So please, why don't you start the...
Thank you. I'd like to thank both our guests for coming. And I come from a long line of journalists in the Middle East. And I've been raised to believe that a journalist has a moral responsibility to promote global citizenship and promoting truth and promoting sound ideas in whatever they relay. Now, I'm saddened that you have failed, Mr. Rosen, to...
You're as a Christian?
Yes, I'm almost there.
Let her speak.
Patience, please. Thank you. You seem to separate the Western way of life with the Sharia way of life. And I being a Muslim girl in such a campus in the heart of the capital of the leading world power, if we can say, I can walk you a few corridors down and take you to the prayer room on this campus, which we do not think alienates Muslims from a Western way of life. On the contrary, it promotes their spirituality and makes them better people, only to remind us of their responsibility, which you fail to be clairvoyant of. And secondly, I mean, I would just like to say that see for yourself, and we do. It's as if you say that the Western way of life is the only way of life to live, and I think that is very dangerous for you to go about in stating all your opinions. And I please ask you to revise that and tell me of your opinions. Thank you very much.
We have the next person, please. Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Mooney. I'm a reporter for Cybercast News Service. I'd be interested in knowing to both of you the reaction was to the Pope's recent visit to Turkey and also his earlier speech in Germany that sparked a very vociferous response in the cartoons. I read through the speech earlier today, and it is actually a very intellectual, cerebral speech about faith and reason. It seems to me the discerning person can read through that and see he was quoting somebody else to make a larger point and ask for an interfaith dialogue. And maybe suggested that media bias just reporting violence, but you know, I didn't hear the intellectual response from Islam, which I think he was inviting, but I'd be glad to report right now.
My name is Zahid Bukhari. I'm here in Center for Muslim Christian Understanding. 2 points. So one is you mentioned that Bernard Lewis told you that this is the first time it is happening
On such a scale?
On such a scale. Because this is the globalization period. Now, I think in the early period of 20th century also it happened in India when there was a British Empire and India was a non-Muslim country, Muslims were in minority. One author, Hindu author, he wrote a book about Prophet Muhammad, not about Muslim, not about Islam. I think there's a very distinction about Prophet Muhammad, and there was a huge uproar and the killing and all those things. It happened, it's not a new thing to some extent. But the main point, I think you raised a wonderful point, that the clash of values. But whatever you have been explaining it looks to me it's not a clash of values between Islam and the Western style, or Islam and the liberal democracy. It is a clash of value among the liberal democracy. Because what you have been explaining, you have excluded America from that liberal democracy. Because in liberal democracy, pluralism and adjustment for other faith, absorbing other faith is very important aspect. Here, like the kosher for Jewish is very much necessary in the public school. And following that tradition, Muslims are also demanding halal food in the public school or public sphere. So I think the clash of value is among the liberal democracy, and what you are saying looks like it's a concept of very totalitarian liberal democracy, very fundamentalist liberal democracy, very extremist liberal democracy, which probably you are is becoming the champion of that. This is unfortunate. I think that clash of values among the liberal democracy, you have to decide which liberal democracy you like to represent, and then you also say that other Muslims or other people of the planet that they should follow that.
I just have a simple question. I was just wondering to Mr. Rose, when you were talking about how you put the cartoons in because you wanted to open a dialogue of self-censorship, why you chose to write to your cartoonists and ask them to only depict how they saw Mohammed as opposed to how they saw all the religious leaders.
My name is Sarah Hassan, and I own a media company. I'm also a journalist. I'm going to read my question real quick for Mr. Rose. How many Muslims do you have working at your paper, and specifically in your culture department? And if you did have Muslim input, would it make you think more about publishing something that would cross the line even for moderate and Western Muslims?
Okay, last question. My question is, what now? Would you publish depictions of the Prophet again and in such a similar context? And what actions would you advocate for the broader Muslim society globally should such a depiction happen again? We all learn lessons, and I'm interested in the lessons that both of you have learned and how we might be able to take them away.
One question.
Okay, yes, very briefly. About journalists being moral, responsible, and promoting citizenship. I don't buy that definition of journalism. Journalists have to report the facts. Journalists should not engage in any kind of, community building or promoting peace and things like that. Journalists are out there to report the facts and get the story right. And then it is up to the citizens of a democracy to make informed decisions on the basis of what journalists are reporting. Then the Pope in Turkey. I think I don't understand why people don't see the irony here. People are saying to me or to the Pope and others, if you say we are violent, we are going to kill you. I think it's like a joke. But I think what is important in the Pope's message is the principle of reciprocity. That when Muslims have the right, as they do, to build mosques, to preach the gospel, to have their way of life as long as it is in accordance with the principles of democracy, Christians and other religious minorities should have exactly the same rights in the Muslim world, and they don't. And I have to say, I don't think this is a conflict between them and us. I've said that in my remarks. I think this is a conflict and a battle of ideas between those who subscribe to the principles of democracy, including free speech, equal treatment before the law, the rule of law, equality between the sexes, and I don't think that is a specific Western value. And I think you can have different kind of democracies around the world respecting these values. I'm not trying to be, imperialistic in any way. I just happen to think that the people around the world, no matter where they live, no matter what kind of faith they belong to, they are entitled to these liberties that are enshrined in the founding charter of the United Nations. It's as simple as that. And then Mohammed versus Jesus. Why did we not, in the same paper, put images of other prophets? Because there was no problem of self-censorship in dealing with Christianity. And I don't want to be political correct just for the sake of being political correct. There was a legitimate story out there dealing with self-censorship in dealing with Islam. And I was approaching that story. When I happened to notice the same problem with other faiths or ideologies or what have you, I will find an appropriate way to cover that story in my newspaper. We were not especially out to get the Muslims. In fact, I felt insulted, I felt offended by the fact that artists and people in cultural life in Western Europe were submitting themselves to censorship in dealing with Islam, and thereby saying to the Muslim population of Western Europe that you are different. You are like children, so we don't have to, we can't treat you as grown-ups and treat you as we treat everybody else in our society. And then the question about how many Muslims in my department, I don't know, because I don't ask that question when I hire people.
Okay.
Sie können ruhig fragen, tut nicht weh.
You can ask people, that's quite all right.
But it doesn't matter to me as long as people are professionally equipped to do that job, and I don't think belonging to any faith is a quality that you have to ask in order to work as a journalist in a culture section.
Sometimes.
Don't ask what religion people say.
Vielleicht kurz zu dem Papstbesuch und was den Aussagen in Regensburg angeht. Auf die ersten Anfragen seitens der Journalisten habe ich durchaus auch ironisch geantwortet und ich habe gesagt, es scheint mir doch ein wenig seltsam, dass eine katholische Kirche mit ihrem Papst über das Thema Gewalt und Religion spricht und auch noch aus einer Position des Lehrers. Und das scheint mir doch ein bisschen so durchaus eine Sache, wo man durchaus hinterfragen darf. Und das war die erste Reaktion, die wir an den Tag gelegt haben, auch Muslime in Deutschland.
Now, just a note on the Pope's remarks in his speech in Regensburg. When I was asked by journalists for my reaction, I immediately noted, as did many other Muslims I know, the strangeness of the leader of the Catholic Church giving a lecture about violence and religion and history.
Ja, vor allem vor dem Hintergrund, und ich meine, viele der Christen, die das Land vor 200, 300 Jahren hier aufgesucht haben, sind von der katholischen Kirche geflüchtet. Es gab dort einen Pogrom, es gab die Zeit, wo es eine Inquisition gab, und übrigens das Zitat, was der Papst gewählt hat seinerzeit in Regensburg, ist von einem Kaiser, der sich in einer Abwehrschlacht gegenüber dem muslimischen Reich verstanden hat. Und dieser Satz ist rein apologetisch, er ist rein verteidigend. Und den sozusagen als Zitat für den Dialog, für das Verständnis von Gewalt und Religion zu nehmen, ist für mich abenteuerlich.
We have to remember the religious persecution that took place under the auspices and with the encouragement of the Catholic Church throughout history, pogroms, inquisitions, and the like, and the fact that the quote that he pulled out of that entire history to highlight in the Regensburg speech was taken from an emperor who was in the midst of a struggle, a military struggle with Islam.
Und deswegen war es aber für uns auch okay, ein Großteil der Muslime auch in der Welt, dass der Vatikan das richtig gestellt hat und zumindest das korrigiert hat, diese Position in mehrfacher Form. Es gab eine Minderheit der Muslime, die gesagt haben, er muss sich unbedingt entschuldigen. Für uns war das so ausreichend, was er damit beigetragen hat dann später.
I do want to note that for most Muslims, the Pope's subsequent clarifications, maybe not explicit apology, but clarifications of what he meant, was received in good faith. And only a small minority insisted he should go much
Und
further.
insofern war es ein positiver Besuch, dass er in die Türkei gegangen ist und dass es auch zu symbolischen Treffen kam, wie zum Beispiel den Besuch der Blauen Moschee oder dass dann noch das Treffen mit dem Premierminister zustande gekommen ist. Und das sind wichtige Anlässe und sie haben sicherlich dazu beigetragen, dass auch in der muslimischen Welt der neue Papst da anknüpfen konnte, zum Teil zumindest, wo der alte aufgehört hat, nämlich gerade was den Dialog zwischen Islam und Christentum angeht, dass das wieder unter einem neuen Licht und einer neuen Position gesehen wird.
To come back to the visit to Turkey, I think it's a very positive step against the background of the controversy, particularly the visit to the Blue Mosque, the fact that he was received by the Prime Minister after all, and we may see this Pope linking back to some of the initiatives of the previous Pope in the interreligious sphere, and in particular, we may see progress on Catholic-Muslim dialogue.
Lassen Sie mir noch einen Satz sagen zu der Bemerkung von Herrn Rose in Sachen, wir haben hier die Möglichkeit, in westlichen Ländern eine Moschee zu bauen, eine Kirche zu bauen, aber in der muslimischen Welt können wir das nicht oder dort eingeschränkt.
In conclusion, just a final note about the remark Mr. Rose made about the fact that Muslims can build mosques in Western countries, but Christians or others don't have the same rights necessarily in the Muslim world.
Hier wird dieses Schubladendenken, dieses Denken in Kategorien, hier sind wir, dort sind die Muslime, hier ist das Gute, dort ist das Böse. Dieses Schubladendenken wird damit gefördert. Die Realität sieht doch ganz anders aus.
Here we see an example of oversimplification of a very complex reality.
Die Situation sieht so aus, dass in einem Großteil der muslimischen Welt Regime, Diktaturen herrschen, wo alle Religionsgemeinschaften darunter leiden. Manche Religionsgemeinschaften mehr, manche weniger. Wenn dort ein Bau einer Kirche nicht erlaubt ist, dann haben wir alle dagegen einzustehen und müssen uns dagegen wehren. Das ist nicht nur eine Frage von Muslimen oder Christen.
The problem here is we're dealing for the most part with dictatorships who repress all religious groups, and if a church can't be built in one of these countries, it is in fact a problem not just for Christians, but for anyone who cares about these questions.
Aber als amerikanischer Bürger, als deutscher Bürger, bin ich hier zu Hause und hier. Und darum muss ich mich darum kümmern, was hier passiert. Und liegt nicht in meinem Einzugsbereich und auch nicht in meiner direkten Verantwortung, sozusagen für Dinge, die in anderen Ländern passieren, meinen Kopf dafür herzuhalten.
But as a German citizen or an American citizen, this is my country, this is my society, I should really be focusing my attention on how we are dealing with some of the problems that we've outlined.
Aber meine Verpflichtung ist, für die Menschenrechte, für Demokratisierung überall zu sorgen und auch einzustehen und dafür zu werben. Und Menschenrechte, das ist nicht nur eine Frage von Hemisphäre, von einer bestimmten Kategorie Länder. Menschenrechte gehören allen Menschen, nicht nur den Christen oder den Muslimen. Es gehören allen Menschen, die daran beteiligt wollen. Und sie haben ein Recht darauf. Und sie wissen, dass in vielen, vielen Ländern Menschenrechte mit Füßen getreten werden. Und dagegen müssen wir vorgehen, ob wir nun Muslime oder Christen oder Agnostiker oder gar keine Religionsangehörigen sind.
I think it really all comes down to human rights. Human rights are a global problem by definition. They don't just concern Christians or Muslims, but all of us, religious or non-religious. And repression of human rights anywhere is a concern.
Well, thank you. I want to thank on behalf of Tom and myself our two guests for coming a long way to talk about these very important issues. Surely you didn't think we were going to solve this in 90 minutes. So we hope we've at least shown how deep the gulf is in some ways, and yet how much possibility there is for a resolution over the long run as long as we keep talking. So thank you, and please, the exit is out that way. I believe that way is closed, so make your way out, and we hope to see you at the next event that the Berkley Center and the BMW Center do together. Bye.